This is the largest tidal marsh restoration project ever constructed in Oregon.
These 400 acres are going to make a significant difference on this 1,000 square mile watershed. We're digging 5 miles of stream and tidal channels to restore the natural flows to this site.
Those are the lungs and the bloodstream of a tidal well, and that's how the tides come in and go out. And they're gone here.
When the early settlers arrived, they basically diked off the marshes, drained them, and converted them to pasture.
Ducks Unlimited first surveyed this site in 2000, and it's now 2011. This project has been part of my life longer than my wife has.
The Coquille River historically was one of the most productive streams in the Pacific coast. We have a great opportunity to see salmon and steelhead come back in strong numbers.
There will be instantaneous value to fish and wildlife. There's been shorebirds circling around on the mudflats here. It's almost as if to say, come on, hurry up, we're ready for some new habitat.
We're going to almost double the habitat, and that makes more food for those little fish to pack on weight.
To be able to come back out on this landscape where we know people have fished for thousands of years and be able to make that happen again would be a special thing.
So much fish was caught right here at the refuge in the past, and we see testimony to that in all the archaeological fishing weirs. People simply knew that by guiding fish into traps on outgoing tides, they could make a living on a daily basis throughout the year.
Right now, there's not much growing out here that would really serve very well for making, say, a basket or a fishing weir, but over the next 5, 10, 15 years, those plants are going to come back.
There's 4,000 years of human history at the mouth of the river. These represent Indian lives and the lives of Coquille people from the beginning of time right up through today.
And this is one of the farthest inland of all the weir sites. So this is one of the larger stakes in this weir, and it's actually got some of the bark on it.
We just opened a dike here, and these are our first flows coming through. Nice, cool marine waters coming up the Coquille River estuary.
So the tide is coming back on this site for the first time in about 100 years.
To be the first vessel into the channel, it's an honoring.
The Coquille tribe just brought their ceremonial canoe through the first day that we opened the marsh to tidal action, and I have to tell you, it's pretty emotional. The tides are washing over us, and it's just a great feeling.
This is our passion, is to restore this natural habitat in this wetland.
Hello and welcome to this webcast lecture on the Revolution of 1830 in France. In this series on the politics of the 19th century, we've already discussed the Congress of Vienna and the effect of the Holy Alliance of reactionary powers throughout the continent as a whole, including the reign of Wellington and Castlereagh during the decades of reaction, as they were known, reaction and repression in the first 2 decades of the 19th century in England. In this webcast lecture, I want to concentrate more carefully on what happened in France. After the defeat of Napoleon, the victorious powers, the reactionary Holy Alliance of Russia, Prussia, and Austria, together with their allies, the English and some smaller countries, Holland, Denmark, and so on, had reimposed a monarchy on France. They'd re-established the Bourbon dynasty. Constitutional monarchy where the monarch has executive power, but the monarch must be answerable to Parliament. That said, the new National Assembly that was part of the Restoration Constitution in France was in no way democratic. The franchise, the vote, was highly restrictive. It was more restrictive in some ways than the British Parliament at that time, which was very, very undemocratic as well, until the Reform Act of 1832 began to allow even the middle classes to vote. Supreme executive power in France was invested in the monarch, and only the monarch could propose laws. At the same time, the Roman Catholic Church, which had been disestablished during the Revolution, was reinstated as the state religion. It was given a role in education and in the universities, such as there was education at that time. Religious censorship was introduced into France, and the priests, the local priests, and the whole kind of hierarchy and bureaucracy of the Catholic Church in France was paid for by the state, and aspects of canon law, church law, received the blessing of French legal common law. The model was a reactionary, conservative, constitutional democracy in which the church would play a large role, and in which the French state would take its place within the Congress of Vienna system, the Congress system as it was known, within a new Europe of reactionary, religious, undemocratic and repressive states led by the Holy Alliance, Russia, Prussia and Austria, and France playing a part in that role. Although the constitution was changed in this way after the defeat of Napoleon, many of the social changes and economic changes that had been brought in by the revolution stayed in place. So, by and large, the peasants retained control of the land that they'd seized from the breakup of the big aristocratic estates. The French aristocracy, the landed aristocracy, the French, as it were, opposite number to people like Wellington in England, had been decimated by Madame Guillotine, and so land was far more widely spread in France than in England at that time. And this was to have a marked effect on the economic development of France through the 19th and 20th century. There were large numbers of small and medium-sized peasants who owned their own farms, which that they had gained during the revolution of the 1780s, 1790s, and they were to retain that. There was no wholesale return of these lands to the aristocracy. Likewise, the Napoleonic reform of the old state, the old monarchical state, stayed in place. The new Bourbon monarchy was less grandiose than it had been before the revolution. There was no Versailles culture anymore, no building of huge palaces, no Marie Antoinette sort of scene. So it was a more economical sort of monarchy. The reform of the state bureaucracy and the judicial system that had taken place during the revolution also stayed in place, which effectively meant very, very centralized control of the whole of France by the judiciary in Paris and by departments of state in Paris. So following the Restoration in 1815, there were subsequent revolutions, including the one in 1830 I'm going to talk about. But the basic shape of France as a country of peasants, of well-to-do, relatively well-to-do small farms, a highly populated countryside, very much in contrast to either England on the one hand, which was through the 19th century to become depopulated countryside with virtually no peasants, no self-sufficient farmers, industrialized farming. France was to maintain a kind of organic, local, small farm culture right up until, well, almost up to the present day, in fact. So France was a country of farmers, a rural country, a country of peasants. But it had this one overbearing city, Paris, and Paris's power over this country of peasants was a remarkable aspect of France throughout the 19th and 20th century. You have a powerful centralized French bureaucracy ruling over an overwhelmingly peasant country. And the difference between the culture of Paris on the one hand and the one or two industrial regions that were to develop in France and the rest of the French countryside became very, very remarkable and still is to some extent. In the context of the Revolution of 1830, which this webcast is about, and the Revolution of 1848, which we're going to come on to discuss, you see that Paris is a very radical, revolutionary sort of place, but the French countryside, in the main, very conservative. Essentially, what's happened here is in the revolution of the 1780s and 1790s, the thing we call the French Revolution, the peasants had got their farms, and that's really all they wanted. They didn't want to go any further with the revolution, and they were quite happy as far as they were concerned. Hegel's, kingdom of God on earth had arrived when they got hold of the family farm, expropriating it from the aristocrats. They had no real interest in any further radical change, no sympathy with the growing urban poor. Processes in France were underway similar to those in England, perhaps not quite so dramatic as with people gathering in to the industrial towns. But because the distress of the rural population wasn't so extreme in France, because many people could still make a living in the countryside, thus the pool of labour available in the cities to develop French industry was correspondingly small. So French economic development through the 19th century was much slower than England. For most of history, France had been streets ahead in terms of its prosperity, its technological innovation, its sheer economic power. The end of that French domination really comes with the Napoleonic War and the victory of Wellington at Waterloo. And by 1850, France has fallen well behind on almost every indicator. With those remarks, we've come to the end of part one of this series of videos about the French Revolution of 1830.